Hey guys, Karenology here. This one is pure gold. Pettiness, drama, and an ending that will leave you speechless. They say, when your voice is taken from you, the world gets quieter. That's not true. The noise just changes, turns inward into a roaring storm no one else can hear. After the stroke, I lost my speech, but not my mind. That was the cruel part. I still had thoughts, opinions, jokes, and old sayings from my father, like, don't argue with fools, just build a better fence. But all I had left was a whiteboard and a marker. I moved to Willow Bend for peace. The place had a kind of lazy charm, sunburnt mailboxes, cracked sidewalks, and the scent of honeysuckle hanging in the air like a hymn. The house I bought stood near a dry lake bed, a faded blue structure with warped siding, and a swing creaking on the porch. I didn't need much, just enough room for my tools, my books, and my memories. On the third morning, she came. Her name tag read Karen Holloway, chairwoman of the Homeowner Association. She knocked like she was looking for a fight. I opened the door, nodded, and waited. She talked nonstop, pointing at my garbage bin, my mailbox, even the wind chimes I had hung from the porch. These haven't been approved, she said. They don't align with community aesthetics. I blinked. Then I raised my board. Wind chimes? She sneered. There are rules here, sir. You agreed to them when you bought this property. Non-compliance can lead to fines. Or worse, I nodded. But inside, something old and stubborn twitched awake. My dad used to say, sometimes silence is the loudest answer. That was my first interaction with her. And I could already smell the rot beneath the lavender perfume. She wasn't running a community, she was running a kingdom. And everyone else? Peasants. Over the next few weeks, the letters started. Violation notices, fines, anonymous complaints. Always signed with the cold, impersonal stamp of the Homeowner Association. No return phone number, just instructions. Comply or pay. Livia was the first person who spoke to me like a human. She worked at a local auto shop and lived 2 blocks down. She saw me wrestling with my mower and walked over with a jug of iced tea. Tattoos curled up her arms like vines, and she had grease under her nails. You the new guy with the silent treatment? I grinned and wrote, involuntary. Stroke. She shrugged. Still got a face for poker. Gus came next. He didn't talk either. Not because he couldn't, but because he chose not to. Deaf since birth. A veteran. Tough as nails and always working on something in his shed until the Homeowner Association made him tear it down. Said it was an unauthorized structure. I saw him sitting on the curb one afternoon, looking at his empty backyard like he'd lost a limb. There was also Mrs. Chen, a soft-spoken widow who taught calligraphy and kept a red paper lantern on her porch. Karen made her take it down. Said it was a fire hazard. Said it was un-American. That word stuck in my throat. Un-American. Like she owned the definition. And then came the final straw. The local library, a small, weather-beaten building with crooked shelves and a smell like sun-dried paper, was going to be demolished. The land had been acquired by the Homeowner Association to make way for a new community fitness plaza. That building meant something to me. It was where I first read Thoreau, where I escaped my childhood home, where I kissed my wife under the flickering light of a summer reading event. And they were going to rip it down for a row of treadmills? No, not quietly, not this time. I wrote a letter. Then another. I dropped one in every mailbox within walking distance. I signed them anonymously, calling myself the archivist. I told stories about what the library had meant to people, about the erosion of community, about the slow death of quiet dignity under the Homeowner Association's heel, and people started whispering. Not everyone, of course. Some folks were too scared, but others, Livia, Gus, Mrs. Chen, they began to look at me differently. Like maybe, just maybe, silence could be contagious. Then the police showed up at my door. 2 officers. One older, one young enough to still smell like Academy soap. "We received a complaint," the younger one said. Eyes darting to the board in my lap, I wrote, "From who?" He hesitated. "Homeowner Association says you're distributing inflammatory material." I nodded slowly, reached down, handed them one of the letters. The older officer read it. Then again. "You write this?" I nodded. He folded it, stuck it in his pocket. "You keep doing what you're doing." The younger one looked confused. The older one just nodded and walked away. That night, I sat on my porch. The wind picked up. My wind chimes sang their little song, and for the first time in weeks, I smiled. But I knew this wasn't over. Karen hadn't heard the last of me. And silence, as my father once said, was only golden when you could afford not to use your voice. A few nights later, a rock shattered the window of my shed. I heard it before I saw it. A short, sharp crack that jerked me awake from the recliner where I'd dozed off. Marker still in hand. I shuffled outside with a flashlight, heart thudding like the old drum I used to play in high school band. The beam caught shattered glass, my scattered tools, and something else. A crumpled flyer, half buried in the gravel. I opened it. Silence isn't always golden. Sometimes it's cowardice. No signature, but I didn't need one. The Homeowner Association was trying to send a message. I taped the broken window with cardboard, then sat on my porch until morning. Wind chimes clinking nervously above me like a chorus of anxious voices. My hands trembled from more than age. Not fear, not exactly, but something close. A sense that I'd finally stirred the hornet's nest, and now the hornets knew my scent. By noon, 3 neighbors stopped by. First was Livia, arms crossed and jaw tight. "You okay?" I raised my board. "Tired, but not done." "Good," she said, handing me a walkie-talkie. "Channel 7 for emergencies." Next came Gus. He didn't say anything. He just put a folding chair beside mine and sat. We watched the street like old dogs guarding a porch. It was enough. Then Mrs. Chen arrived, holding a plastic container. "Dumplings," she said softly. "You need strength." I almost cried. By evening, I knew we had to go further. One flyer wasn't enough. They had signs, meetings, fines. We needed something they couldn't ignore. So I made a paper, not digital. Too easy to trace. I bought an old typewriter from a thrift store, set it up in my garage, and began typing. Stories, statements, exposés. We called it the fence line. Every issue featured a different voice. Livia wrote about how the Homeowner Association shut down her garage because of excessive noise, even though her only client that day was me. Gus submitted a comic strip, a silent war veteran, squaring off with a monstrous HOA beast. Mrs. Chen contributed a piece about her late husband, who came to America with nothing but a book of Proverbs, and the hope of building a porch where he could drink tea in peace. We printed copies late at night, using an old church copier that Livia's cousin let us borrow. The pages smelled like ink and dust. Real, raw, and loud, without saying a word. Every week, we slipped the issues into mailboxes. Carefully, quietly, like laying seeds. People started waving at me more. I got nods from men who used to avoid eye contact, and smiles from women who once pretended not to see me at the grocery store. One evening, a teenage boy rang my doorbell just to say, "That last piece? About the lantern? That was beautiful." Karen, of course, wasn't blind to any of it. She responded, like all tyrants do. Louder, stricter, meaner. She banned any visible decorations without pre-approval, raised the fines, sent out patrols. Yes, actual patrols. Volunteer HOA enforcers in neon vests, marching the neighborhood like hall monitors with clipboards. Then came the threat of eviction, not just for me. For Gus, for Mrs. Chen, for anyone behind on dues or with chronic violations. They called it community cleansing. I stared at that phrase on the letter I received and felt something shift. This wasn't just about a wind chime anymore. It was about dignity, about place, about the right to sit on your porch with cracked paint and peeling shutters and still be called a neighbor. So I wrote something different. Not a flyer, not a letter, a declaration. We called for a town gathering. Not in the HOA clubhouse. They'd never allow that. We chose the old library lot, the one they planned to demolish. We didn't ask permission. We just showed up. First, it was 10 of us. Then 30. Then 80. Lawn chairs, blankets, coolers. Someone brought a guitar. Kids chased fireflies. It felt like the 4th of July without the fireworks, and when the sun dipped behind the trees, I stepped onto a folding table, held up my board, and began to write. I am not less of a neighbor because I don't speak. I turned it. We are not less of a community because we don't comply. The crowd clapped. Then someone shouted, "We are not afraid!" The next morning, the HOA declared war. They called the police again. This time, they didn't come just to talk. They arrived at sunrise. 3 cruisers, their lights cutting through the morning fog like angry ghosts. Karen stood out front in a tailored blazer and heels too high for the gravel driveway. She didn't flinch when the officers stepped onto my property. She just handed them a folder thick with printouts, violation notices, photos, accusations. I sat on my porch with Gus and Livia, our breakfast untouched. My hand trembled, but not from fear. The officer in charge was the same one who'd read my flyer weeks ago. He looked older somehow, tired, maybe from being dragged into something that should have stayed neighborly. He nodded at me, almost apologetically. "Sir," he said, "we're responding to a formal complaint issued by the Homeowner Association. They're requesting an inspection and possible citation under municipal code for unsafe property use and unauthorized gatherings." I held up my whiteboard. "Where's the warrant?" He blinked. They filed under civil code, not criminal. It's complicated. Gus stood, not fast, but with that kind of weight that makes people shut up and listen. He signed something slowly, then pointed at Karen. Livia translated, "He says this is a lie. There was no danger, no damage, just people, together." Karen stepped forward. "This man has incited unrest. He's a risk to our community." I wrote, "Having neighbors is not unrest." They issued me a citation. And then they left. Not a raid, not an arrest, but a warning shot across the bow. The message was clear. Sit down, stay quiet, fade away. Instead, we built louder. That week, Livia put up a little free library on her lawn and filled it with banned issues of The Fence Line. Gus painted murals of gardens and laughter on the plywood covering his old workshop. Mrs. Chen began teaching calligraphy on her porch, using water on stone so no one could claim it was graffiti. And me? I started archiving everything. Every letter, every fine, every flyer. I scanned them, filed them, indexed them. I reached out to a local law clinic downtown, posing as a silent historian collecting civil documentation for a book. The woman on the phone, Erin her name was, had a tired voice and a quick mind. When I showed her the materials, her tone shifted. This, she said, is bigger than a homeowner dispute. This is coordinated harassment. She offered to help, quietly, carefully. She said cases like this didn't win on noise. They won on paper. In the meantime, Karen doubled down. Patrols turned aggressive. They left red tags on Livia's truck, warning of unauthorized parking. Gus received a notice that his house's paint color was not within the spectrum of approved palettes. Even Mrs. Chen got a letter demanding her porch plants be registered. But what Karen didn't realize was that every tag, every notice, every insult added fuel. People were getting angrier, not just the quiet ones. The silent majority was waking up. Then one morning, I found a note taped to my front door. Typed, anonymous, no HOA logo. Stop now, before someone gets hurt. Livia saw it first. She ripped it down and swore under her breath. They're bluffing. They're scared. But I wasn't so sure. That evening, the fence behind Gus's house was set on fire. He wasn't home. Someone had doused the boards with accelerant and lit it up. By the time the fire department arrived, it had scorched half the backyard. The official report called it accidental ignition. No suspects. But we all knew. Gus didn't talk for 2 days. Then he knocked on my door, with soot on his sleeves and eyes like burning coals. He handed me a sketch. It was a comic strip, his best yet. A monstrous HOA creature, now with torches in its claws, looming over a small home. But this time, the family inside wasn't cowering. They stood tall, together. I pinned it to the old oak tree out front. The next morning, a dozen more sketches joined it. Then flyers. Then posters. The oak became a message board. A monument. Karen called it defacement. We called it community. They tried to cut the tree down. It happened just after sunrise again. Always at dawn. Like that gave them the moral high ground. A white utility truck with no markings rolled up beside the old oak, and 2 men in neon vests stepped out. One of them revved up a chainsaw while the other started uncoiling caution tape. I was already sitting on my porch, my coffee steaming beside me, marker in hand. I stood slowly, walked across the lawn with that ache in my hip that never quite healed from the old factory fall, and held up my whiteboard. Who sent you? One of them shrugged. Homeowner Association. Said this tree's a public hazard. Roots are damaging sidewalk integrity. I pointed at the sidewalk. Not a crack in sight. Behind me, a screen door slammed. Gus came limping down his steps, carrying a garden hose like a lasso. Livia followed, pulling on boots with a look that could curdle milk. Mrs. Chen emerged last, holding a thermos and a quiet fury. "Put that saw down," Livia said. "Now." The younger man hesitated. "Look, we're just hired. Work order's official." Then tell whoever signed it that we're officially done being pushed around," she said. More neighbors started appearing. People I hadn't even spoken to before. Mr. Hollis, who'd been fined for painting his shutters off-white. A young couple from the duplex down the road who were threatened with legal action over a vegetable patch. Even old Dottie, who hadn't left her porch in months, showed up in her housecoat, brandishing a cane like a saber. The workers backed off. One of them looked at the crowd and muttered, "Ain't worth it." They got in their truck and drove off. We stood in silence for a while, just looking at the tree. A few leaves drifted down as if it was bowing to us. Livia broke the silence. "We should name it." Gus tapped his notepad and showed it to us. "Constitution." We all nodded, but the fight wasn't over. That afternoon, Karen filed a formal complaint with the city. Not just about the tree, about the entire block. Claimed it was a blighted area exhibiting resistance to regulatory guidance. Resistance. She made us sound like a militia, but maybe that wasn't too far off. We were defending something sacred. Not weapons, not wealth, but a way of life. Erin, the lawyer from the clinic, came out to visit that week. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 30s, sharp eyes behind smudged glasses. She brought a folder thicker than a preacher's Bible. "Document everything," she said. "Photographs, timestamps, testimonies. This is no longer neighborly harassment. It's civil intimidation. If they push this into legal territory, we need evidence. We gotta work." Livia mounted a GoPro under her porch awning. Gus jury-rigged an old doorbell cam to stream to a private server. I started scanning every page I could find from HOA's meeting records, some of which we had to find through less than official means. Mrs. Chen proved to be the real ace. She used to work in city archives back in San Francisco, decades ago. She taught me how to search old zoning maps, public easement records, and HOA bylaws. Turns out, most of the so-called rules weren't legally binding, just strongly worded suggestions enforced through fear. Fear we no longer had. Karen wasn't quiet either. She sent cease and desist letters through her personal attorney. Claimed defamation, libel, inciting unrest. One letter accused Gus of creating unsafe public displays through unlicensed mural expression. I wrote back a quote from Thomas Paine. "The duty of a true patriot is to protect his country from its government." The next day, the police returned. But not just a pair this time. 4 cars, badges visible, hands near their belts. They came for me. Karen stood behind them, lips curled into a professional smirk. "This man is being detained for the unlawful distribution of materials inciting civic disorder," one officer said, clearly uncomfortable. I looked at Gus, at Livia, at Mrs. Chen. None of them flinched. I wrote on my board, "You can take me, but you can't take all of us." Then I turned and held it high for Karen to see. "Your silence is louder than mine." They put me in the cruiser. No cuffs, at least. Just the slow ride into town, past the homes I'd come to know, past the tree we'd named Constitution, past the wind chimes still swinging on my porch. I didn't feel defeated. I felt ready because I knew what came next wasn't just about me. They held me overnight, not in a cell. Just a cold municipal office with flickering fluorescent lights and a stack of forms no one expected me to fill out. They didn't know what to do with me. I hadn't broken a law. Not really, but I had challenged something. They relied on more than statutes. Silence. A young officer, nervous and polite, brought me a cup of coffee and tried to make small talk. I responded with my board, same as always. He smiled, sort of. "You've really stirred things up, you know." "Solar pie gam," I wrote. "About time." In the morning, Erin walked in with a binder so heavy it should have come with a warning label. She laid it down on the desk and looked the department head in the eye. "Unless you have formal charges, my client walks. And I'll be filing a complaint for unlawful detainment and suppression of protected civic expression." I've never seen someone sweat through a blazer so fast. They let me go. Outside, I wasn't expecting anyone. But I should have known better. Gus was there with his truck. Livia rode shotgun. They honked once, and I smiled. The drive home felt like a victory parade, even if there were no flags. When we pulled into my driveway, I saw the entire neighborhood waiting. Not everyone, no, but enough. They'd lined the sidewalk with signs. "Speak without sound." Community over control. His silence. Our voice. Even Constitution. Our tree. Had a banner strung between two limbs. "You messed with the wrong porch." But the war was far from over. Karen responded with a special meeting of the Homeowner Association, closed to the public, held in the HOA clubhouse under Emergency Procedural Authority. We weren't invited, but Mrs. Chen had a cousin on the inside, and what she learned made my blood run cold. They were planning mass citations, retroactive fines, legal threats for nuisance behavior. They even proposed banning any future porch gatherings or shared events without prior board approval. They were doubling down, but we had something they didn't: momentum. That night, we gathered again on the library lot. Bigger crowd this time. Someone set up speakers. Erin gave a speech about rights, representation, and how the HOA had strayed from its mandate. Gus unveiled a new mural on canvas. Karen as a queen, atop a crumbling tower of paper notices, while neighbors pulled away the foundation. And then it happened. Dottie, quiet, fragile, wrapped in a knit shawl the color of autumn, stepped forward. She needed 2 people to help her up to the microphone. She cleared her throat. And then, with a voice like worn velvet, she said, "I was here when this town was fields and train tracks. I remember when neighbors brought you pie, not paperwork." She paused, looking at the crowd. "We've let these people scare us because they wrote their rules in ink, but we forget. We're the ones holding the paper." Oi. The silence that followed was louder than applause. The next day, a city council member came to visit. Erin had sent them our files, and now, finally, Someone outside the neighborhood was listening. Investigators were assigned. Meetings were scheduled. The HOA's finances were put under review. Karen tried to brush it off as political theatrics, but even she couldn't ignore the storm brewing. Then came the biggest crack. James Corwin, Karen's own vice chair, her right-hand man, stepped down, publicly, at a community meeting we weren't supposed to know about. He stood up and said, "I didn't sign up for this. I thought we were helping. We're not. We're hurting." The room fell apart after that. We found out later that he'd left a box of documents on Aaron's doorstep that same night. Internal emails, meeting minutes, financial records. The kind of stuff that doesn't just make news, it makes change. And while all that churned in the background, I sat on my porch, watching the wind play with my chimes. Karen hadn't been seen in 2 days. The tension was thick, like the air before a thunderstorm. Something big was coming. The news broke on a Thursday. Local Channel 7 aired a segment called Trouble in Willow Bend, featuring drone footage of Constitution Tree, community murals and interviews, blurred faces, distorted voices, talking about the Homeowner Association's overreach. One reporter stood in front of the library lot, holding up our printed flyers. But what really lit the match was the financial audit. According to the documents James Corwin leaked, the Homeowner Association had been misappropriating funds for years, charging homeowners for non-existent repairs, overpaying contractors tied to board members, using beautification funds for personal expenses. Karen had approved it all. The city opened a formal investigation. Subpoenas were issued. Karen's smiling photo vanished from the HOA website. We didn't gloat. Not exactly. But the air in Willow Bend shifted. People walked slower, waved more, lingered outside just a little longer. The fear had thinned, but Karen wasn't gone. On Saturday, a black SUV pulled up in front of my house. She stepped out in sunglasses and a crisp blazer, her heels clicking against the sidewalk like a metronome of menace. She didn't knock, just stood at the foot of my porch and looked up at me like she was trying to bore a hole through my skull. I should have known it was you behind all this, she said. I picked up my board. You knew. That's why you came after me first. Her jaw tensed. You think you've won something? A few protests? A couple headlines? This community needs order. Rules. People like you. You think chaos is freedom, I wrote. People like me remember when decency didn't come with a price tag. She stepped closer. You're a coward, hiding behind your silence, stirring others to do what you're too afraid to say. I stood, walked to the edge of the porch, held up my board. I say more with quiet than you ever did with a megaphone. She left without another word. But the next morning, flyers appeared across the neighborhood. Copies of fabricated emails. Photos taken out of context. Lies wrapped in just enough truth to sound real. They were meant to smear Aaron, James, Gus, and even Dottie. But we were ready. Livia and I printed a counterflyer titled Truth Over Fear, featuring side-by-side comparisons, public records, corrections. Aaron recorded a statement and posted it online. Gus made a poster of Karen riding a wrecking ball made of HOA fines, crashing into a house labeled Community. The paper was starting to outweigh the silence. Then someone slashed my tires, all 4, in broad daylight. No witnesses, no security footage. The next day, Livia's garage was broken into. Nothing stolen, just her tools scattered, her benches overturned. We knew what it meant. That night, we met at the library lot. No music, no lights, just a circle of chairs and a lot of quiet breathing. Erin paced slowly, holding a notebook. They're getting desperate, she said, and that makes them dangerous. But it also means they're near collapse. What do we do? Someone asked. Mrs. Chen spoke. We stay visible. We don't hide. Bullies thrive in the dark. I raised my board. Time for the town to see them in the light. So, we organized something new. Not a protest. A community exhibition. We called it Porch Light Night. Everyone was invited to sit on their porch, hang their wind chimes, play music, read, laugh, live. No slogans, no chants, just life. And when the evening came, it was like a spell broke. Every house lit up. Grills fired. Radios played oldies. Neighbors shared lemonade and stories. Gus projected cartoons on his garage door. Dottie waved at kids from her porch. Livia played slide guitar. I sat with my marker in hand, but I didn't need to write a single word. Karen drove past twice. Didn't stop. We watched her taillights fade into the night, and for the first time in months, it felt like we were home again. But morning would bring something none of us expected. The morning after Porch Light Night, I opened my front door to find yellow tape across my walkway. Unsafe structure. No entry without municipal clearance. A bold red notice from the city was stapled to the railing, citing structural concerns due to neglected maintenance and unauthorized modifications. It was signed by a building inspector I'd never met, and it had been filed at 6:04 a.m. 6:04. Karen didn't sleep, it seemed. She schemed. Livia showed up 10 minutes later with coffee and fire in her eyes. They can't evict you without due process. This is retaliatory. I wrote, they're testing limits. She nodded. Then, let's give them new ones. We called Erin. She was already 2 steps ahead. They're using city channels now, she said over speakerphone. We need someone inside. Someone who knows the system. That someone turned out to be Marvin Lewis, a retired zoning officer who lived 3 blocks away. We found him in his backyard tending roses, wearing socks with sandals and a hat shaped like a trout. When we explained what was happening, he grunted once and disappeared into his shed. Came back with a dusty binder and a municipal badge that hadn't seen daylight since Obama's first term. I've seen this trick before, he said, and I know exactly which forms they forged. Within hours, he drafted an appeal, flagged the permit as suspicious, and submitted a challenge to the city clerk. Paper beats bluff every time, while Erin and Marvin tangled with bureaucracy. The rest of us prepared for escalation. Gus fixed the wiring on my porch. Livia and 2 neighbors reinforced the floorboards. Mrs. Chen took over my meals, somehow knowing what I needed before I did. It wasn't just about me anymore. We heard whispers that Karen had been summoned for an official hearing with the city's ethics board. The word embezzlement was now part of the public record. But, with her back against the wall, she went scorched earth. 3 more homes received unsafe structure notices. The community center's water supply was shut off, and Gus, quiet, gentle Gus, was served with a lawsuit claiming his murals had violated copyright law. Copyright for paintings of wind chimes and sunflowers. They were swinging wildly now, so we decided to end it. Aaron filed a formal injunction. We petitioned for a restraining order against Karen acting in any homeowner association capacity until the investigation concluded. We compiled every report, every citation, every piece of testimony into a single document, and we scheduled a public forum, hosted not by the HOA, but by the City Council. Open to all residents. Broadcast on local access TV. Karen had no choice but to show up. The town hall was standing room only. Folding chairs squeaked beneath nervous bodies. Cameras blinked red. Microphones waited. Karen arrived, flanked by a stiff lawyer, and what was left of her dwindling support. She smiled like a realtor, selling beachfront in Nebraska. Aaron spoke first, firm, clear, precise. Then came Marvin, with copies of permits, timelines, handwriting comparisons. He laid out the forged documents like cards in a losing hand. Gus followed. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. He wheeled in a display of his mural sketches, each one capturing the spirit of the town better than any HOA newsletter ever had. The room was silent, and then the moderator asked if I wanted to speak. I walked slowly to the front, held up my board. I lost my voice, not my rights. Flip. You work for the people, not over them. Flip. Silence doesn't mean surrender. Flip. This is our home, and we're taking it back. The crowd rose before I even stepped down. Karen's lawyer whispered something, and she stood up. She tried to speak, to pivot, to reframe. But the room wasn't listening. Not anymore. The hearing adjourned with applause, and when I stepped outside, the wind picked up. My chimes rang out clear, like a bell at the end of a long storm. It didn't end with confetti. There was no marching band or parade. No city official handed me a key wrapped in ribbon. But justice, when it comes, doesn't need a spotlight. It just needs to land in the right hands. Karen Holloway resigned the following week. Officially, it was for personal health reasons. Unofficially, she was given a choice: step down or face criminal charges for falsifying documents, misusing HOA funds, and retaliation against residents. Her lawyer disappeared before the ink dried. The Homeowner Association was placed under temporary oversight by a neutral administrator from the city. Fines were suspended. Evictions reversed. Notices rescinded. A full audit began. They sent me a letter. Certified. No apology. Just an acknowledgement of procedural overreach and a notice that the unsafe structure label had been withdrawn. I framed it. That Saturday, we held a potluck. Gus grilled hot dogs. Mrs. Chen brought dumplings. Livia made cornbread that tasted like protest and butter. Even Dottie baked cookies with little icing chimes on top. The tree, Constitution, stood tall and calm in the breeze, its limbs heavy with signs from months of silent rebellion. Aaron showed up late, exhausted and smiling, holding a six-pack of root beer like it was champagne. She said the ethics board had forwarded their findings to the county attorney. There might still be a trial. There might still be noise. But it wouldn't be our fight anymore. Not alone. I sat in my usual chair, the one with the squeaky leg and patched cushion, and watched kids chase each other across lawns that once felt fenced off by fear. When the sun dipped low, someone set up a speaker. Old songs played: Sam Cooke, Patsy Cline, a little Dylan. People danced, others swayed, and some, like me, just watched. And then Livia turned to me. "You ever miss your voice?" I thought about it. I wrote, "Only when I have to say something simple, like thank you." She smiled. "You've been saying it all along." A breeze stirred. My wind chimes joined the song. Later that night, I sat alone on the porch, wrapped in a blanket. The stars blinked above. My old tools were put away, my papers stacked, my board clean, and I thought about silence, how it's been used to suppress, to shame, to isolate, but also how it can protect, empower, declare. I never meant to lead anything, never meant to fight. I just wanted peace. But sometimes peace takes work. Sometimes it takes standing your ground without shouting. Sometimes it takes letting a whole town hear what silence can say. And they listened. And now maybe they won't forget. The wind moved through the oak leaves, and I swear it sounded like applause.